Hello, I'm Edwin Newman. Speaking freely today is Marshall McLuhan. I'm sure it's not necessary to offer any clues to who Marshall McLuhan is. If there's anybody who does not recognize the name, it should be sufficient to say the medium is the message. However, it might be useful to sketch in a little background. Marshall McLuhan is a Canadian. He's a professor of English at the University of Toronto. He is director at that university of the Center for Culture and Technology. His writings, some of which were done in collaboration with others, include The Gutenberg Galaxy, Understanding Media, The Mechanical Bride, The Medium is the Massage, and most recently, From Cliché to Archetype. Mr. McLuhan, this question is inevitable, I guess. You're probably sick of it. Why is the medium the message? Why is not the message the message?
Where would you look for the message in an electric light?
Is there necessarily a message in an electric light?
There certainly is. Or a candle. The medium and the message are the same. When you think of the medium as a container, you are thinking in visual terms the hidden meaning of a container is the visual habit of man to put something in its place or around something. The visual man has very much an inclination to make things contain things. But visual space has very peculiar properties. Static. Most people think of space as static. As, for example, the space between you and me, as something that is constant. That is, between you and me, there are so many inches or so many measures, and that those are the same no matter who's sitting there. To a pre-literate man, space has no static properties at all. They're entirely determined by the people or things that are involved in the spatial relationship. So that a person is thought of as creating his own kind of space and not as being inside space. The pre-literate man, the man who lives more by ear than by eye, does not think of himself as being in space at all. There's a delightful little illustration of how pre-literate people, children, feel space. A child on his first airplane flight said, as they took off and climbed higher and higher, he said, "Daddy, when do we start to get smaller?" Now, this is true and happening, and it has the immediate feeling of the natural, authentic child observation about space. To an adult, it seems perfectly obvious that the static space in which people are contained would remain the same, and that the people in that space would remain the same. In point of fact, this is an illusion on the part of the adult. The child is much more in tune with the reality than the adult in this matter. The child is replying to or responding to a dynamic space created by changing physical relationships.
If the physical relationship, Professor McLuhan, does not change, as between us, for example, does the space change?
There's an entire study of this sort of thing by Edward Hall. It's called The Silent Language. It's a study of the kinds of spaces that people use between one another in their daily lives. And he points out how in various parts of the world these spaces vary enormously. And one of the more striking illustrations is the Arab space, preferably 8 inches between people who are friendly, because they like to smell each other.
This is Arab? Arab space.
Now, the visual man prefers the sort of space that there is between you and me. They like to look at each other. They don't think of a friendly relationship as primarily based upon the sense of smell.
As a matter of fact, that's discouraged in our society.
Yes, a visual society is very hostile to odors, except as means of disguising physical facts. And this, the more literate the society, the more narrow the sensory area of awareness, the more specialist, the more concentrated on visual factors. A friend of mine was recently on an expedition with some Indians. He has as a job the finding of the proper names, native names for various places and lakes and rivers in Canada. And when they were coming home one evening, they got off trail, and after a while he said to one of the Indians, "We're lost." And the Indian looked quite startled, and he said, "We not lost. Wigwam is lost." The idea, you see, to an Indian, the idea of a human being getting lost is meaningless, because the man makes his own space. Now, the wigwam could get lost because it is not that dynamic factor that the human being is. This Ed Hall's books on the study of spaces between people, personal spaces, are quite startling, and their way of revealing our very peculiar assumptions.
Well, to take this one step further, you have written, "It is no longer possible to take a fixed position for more than a single moment." Now, is that meant literally? Do you mean anything literally? Perhaps I should put that question.
You can see that a point of view literally means a static position with a vanishing point. Now, in practice, there is no such position, and perhaps there never was. To a person sighting a target with a very high precision instrument, there might be a point of view on a particular object, a target. This idea of a fixed position from which to see things in perspective is a very recent origin in the Western world. And in Shakespeare's time, it was a completely new and exciting experience. It is a kind of outlook that ran into all sorts of difficulties with the scientists in the 17th and 18th centuries, with Newton and others, and Berkeley or Berkeley. The relative position of the visual with regard to the other senses in locating or fixing people's experience in space became a great controversial matter. Newton was or Swift rather, was quite amused at Newton's ideas of space, and in effect said Newton did not discover gravity but levity. Everyone knew about gravity. What Newton discovered was up pull, not down pull. And so Swift turned Newton's world into a joke with the flying island of Laputa. The great scientific utopia of Laputa is airborne, or it's weightless. It's strange that our scientists have given up on weightlessness as a means of solving transportation problems. They've gone for the moon, but they've not thought of anti-gravitation.